The United States Senate was supposed to vote today on reforming filibuster obstruction of voting rights. But there is no vote today. About 2 weeks back, Democratic leader Schumer laid out the case to adapt to what he called historic challenges to secure free and fair elections and vowed a high-stakes vote to change Senate rules on or before January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Now, Schumer and Biden have never made such a big push before, and it was greeted then as big news to pressure those last Democratic holdouts.
Here we are on the cusp of recognizing the life and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., and we're still grappling with the issues of nullification and voter suppression. I hope Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema understand the seriousness of this.
On or before MLK Day, that's within 2 weeks. And the connection is deliberate.
I think Chuck is going to put the bill on the floor, and he's going to put extreme pressure on Joe and Kirsten.
Schumer, by going public that way, was supposed to invoke today's holiday to put that, quote, extreme pressure on Manchin and Sinema. Either Democrats could win, rallying MLK Day and base pressure to get to 50, or in a loss, they could make those holdouts take this hard vote on the ultimate voting rights holiday, a day when more people and their own Democratic constituents might notice. That was the political threat. And yet here we are. There is no vote today, with Schumer backing off and signaling debate starting tomorrow on these voting rights bills and arguing that a vote today turned out to be too difficult, with one Democrat out under COVID and also the bad weather. But here's the thing. Senator Sinema loudly reiterated she's against reforming the filibuster, so Schumer doesn't have 50 votes anyway. The whole issue for today was whether this was a real threat, to do the vote today for real, or a kind of an empty threat with a moving deadline. Now, it's not just about Chuck Schumer. It's about something that anyone who follows Democratic politics is familiar with, the gap between top Democrats claiming filibuster reform is key to democracy itself and the future of the entire Biden presidency, and then not really acting like it, and not executing on a fairly standard piece of political hardball, which they claimed they would deploy 2 weeks ago. Now, people can debate the efficacy of this Schumer-MLK plan, but it was his plan, and he did back off. And for Democrats concerned that party leaders don't fight as hard as the other side time and time again, who feel like they've seen this movie before, well, another president did once talk about this kind of dynamic.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Close. It's actually fool me twice, shame on me. And that's how some are feeling watching this routine. Now, proportion matters. It is still overwhelmingly Republicans, not Chuck Schumer, that are responsible for the actual filibustering of these civil rights bills. And it's Republicans who won't consider even treating the voting rights carve-out like they do nominations or spending policies, which are not magically subject to this filibuster obstruction. But when it comes to Democrats vowing more hardball than they are willing to actually enact, some activists may start to feel like J. Cole's famous call for retribution. Fool me one time, shame on you. Fool me twice, can't put the blame on you. Fool me 3 times, forget the peace signs, let it rain on you. There may be no easy answers given how the Senate works, but many are demanding a level of change that goes beyond rescheduling the supposed tough votes. Let's get into it now with political strategist Che Kominduri, a veteran of the Obama campaign and other Democratic presidential campaigns. Welcome back.
It's good to be back, Ari.
What do you think about this plan to use today for pressure, which has now been delayed?
Well, I would say that the delay is probably the least surprising news of this new year. I mean, everybody knew that there would simply not be a vote. Manchin and Sinema did not back down, and the Republican opposition did not change. The problem here is that Democrats clearly knew the battlefield here. They knew the Republican opposition. They knew why Mitch McConnell would never allow this. They knew how even supposedly non-MAGA Republicans like John Roberts, Mitt Romney, really have as a core belief the idea that states should make it harder for minorities to vote. And it should be harder for all U.S. citizens to vote. And the history of Jim Crow simply isn't applicable here. That is a core Republican belief. That is something that Republicans have believed for many years. And Democrats knew this. And the problem is that we, quite frankly, as a party, have failed to have an effective message and combat all of the disinformation about this legislation in a way that is remotely effective.
When you see Chuck Schumer say in writing, look, we're going to do this on MLK Day, and you might be in a more moderate or red state, but you're still a Democrat, and you're still going to get caught up in the intensity of today, of the civil rights mood, movement, and substance of it. And whether it's at the level of Democratic donors who align with some of these issues or civil rights supporting Democratic voters, then that just evaporates. What message does it send in politics to someone like Senator Sinema that even in the rare time where Chuck Schumer publicly says, hey, you're going to have a tough vote, she doesn't have a tough vote today?
Well, it basically says that Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin simply do not fear Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, or the Democratic grassroots. You know, Machiavelli famously said, in politics, it is better to be feared than loved. Now, that's terrible advice for somebody in a personal relationship, somebody who's worried about their mental health. But in politics, unfortunately, that is very much true. The reality is that Senators Manchin and Senator Sinema, they just simply do not fear Joe Biden, the Biden White House, the administration, the Democratic grassroots, the way that they should. Probably they feared them much more a year ago when Biden was doing very well in the polls. I think, unfortunately, because of his polling drop, it has made him more susceptible for these sorts of maneuvers. And I think one of the things that has become very clear to me is that this has become extremely personal for these two senators and President Biden. I mean, that speech that Kyrsten Sinema gave about a week ago when Joe Biden was coming to the Senate, I mean, there's a lot of discussion as to why she gave such a speech, but to me, it was very clear that one real thing that she was trying to do was stick it to Biden. And that is something that she would not have done if she felt that he was stronger.
Let's take a look at that and get your reaction on the other side. That was, here's Sinema on the floor.
These bills help treat the symptoms of the disease, but they do not fully address the disease itself. And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country. Eliminating the 60-vote threshold will simply guarantee that we lose a critical tool that we need to safeguard our democracy from threats in the years to come.
Of all the days she could have given that speech to reiterate what she is entitled to do, she won her seat, she chose to do it to blow up the incumbent president of her own party's visit to her caucus. In a different era or against a different president, that would be seen as a kind of a political suicide.
Absolutely. It's something that I could not imagine happening to President Obama. It's something I could not imagine even happening to President Clinton. It is a really shocking thing that she had done, and it feels to me like a very personal thing that she had done, which I think is very unfortunate because this should not be about personal politics. I also think the substance of the speech was highly questionable. I mean, all of the things that she said, I don't think really add up. I mean, the reality is if she wants this to be bipartisan, she can reach out. She can actually go over and talk to Mitt Romney and Susan Collins. She already has Lisa Murkowski, et cetera, and try to do that on her own. She doesn't need Democratic leadership's permission to do that. She certainly didn't ask the leadership's permission to go and intern at that winery last year. So I don't know why she needs the permission of the Democratic leadership to try to forge a bipartisan agreement. She did that on the infrastructure bill. So I don't think that any of what her arguments, the substance of her arguments, actually added up.
Yeah, the substance was bizarre because nobody in America actually really thinks that these supermajority rules relate to anything that matters. People generally want government to try to do good things, and they debate what's good. But the idea that certain financial policies and certain nominees to random parts of the judiciary are 51 votes, and then a bunch of other important urgent emergency stuff have to be held to 60 votes, which means they never get an up or down vote, which means they never pass. I just don't think you're going to find regular, normal, thoughtful people who think that's even a good thing. She made the argument that somehow that defends comity or bipartisanship. Che, doesn't it also just give people like her and Manchin a huge get out of political jail free card because they don't have to take the other tough votes they'd have to take on these nail biting 50 vote issues?
Exactly. I mean, I think that's the real agenda here. The real agenda is to avoid some of these difficult votes. I think that also when you talk about MLK Day, you know, the filibuster has a terrible racist history. And it was quite dispiriting to see her sort of celebrate this as bipartisanship. I mean, the MLK holiday itself was filibustered by Jesse Helms for 16 days.
Imagine that.
It basically has that history, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if this were a plot or a movie, you'd say, oh, it's interesting how everything ties together, but it's real life. So when things tie together that are anti-democracy and anti-civil rights, it's not such a neat narrative trick. It's more of something we should monitor to try to fix. But as you've drawn the connections, they're all there. Che Komanduri, good to see you, sir.